Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are clearly at a momentous moment in American history. The American people are engaged. We're getting tens of thousands of people visiting our website, sanders.senate.gov, every day. People want to know what's going on. And as the longest-serving independent in American history in Congress, let me give you my view of where we are right now. First, I do want to say that I get a little bit tired of hearing some of our pundits and some of the politicians around here blithely talking about trillions of dollars in cuts. And I see some of these guys making huge salaries on TV say, why don't they just come to an agreement, $2 trillion in cuts, $3 trillion in cuts? Well, that may be okay if you're making a whole lot of money on television, doing a television show, but clearly those people have not been talking to real Americans. So let me just go over what the media and many of us in Congress have not been talking about, and that is what the impacts of these trillions of dollars of cuts are about. These are not just words on a piece of paper. These are cuts which are going to have devastating impacts on people who are already suffering as a result of the worst recession since the Great Depression. Now, some people come up with this great idea, and they say, you know, the COLA, the cost of living adjustment for Social Security, is too high today. Seniors and disabled vets are getting just too much. And quote-unquote, noted economists, I have not heard from these noted economists, think that it's just too extravagant. Well, Mr. President, you go back to Baltimore, and I'll go to Vermont, and we'll ask seniors whether they think the COLAs they're getting now are too extravagant, given the fact they haven't gotten a COLA in the last 2 years. And studies that I have seen say not only are the COLAs today not too extravagant for Social Security and disabled vets, they are in fact too low because they underestimate the real expenses of seniors, which largely have to do with health care and prescription drugs. Costs are soaring. Any of these pundits or any of these economists who go out and talk to real people and say Social Security COLAs are too high, they're going to get laughed right out of the room because it ain't true. But if we come forward with this so-called chained CPI, this new formulation for COLAs, this is what it will mean in the real world. What it will mean is that if you're 65 today, when you become 75 in 10 years, that will result in a $560 decline in what you otherwise would have gotten in Social Security benefits. And when you're 85, 20 years from today, that'll be $1,000 a year decline. Now, I know that here in D.C., with the lobbyists making millions a year, that when you talk about $1,000 a year, that's what these guys spend on a fancy dinner. It's laughable, but they don't know what goes on in the real world, and that there are millions of seniors today hanging on, trying to pay their prescription drug costs, trying to pay their out-of-pocket costs for health care, and $1,000 a year in 20 years is a lot of money for those people. In my view, it would be immoral and unacceptable to do what a number of plans out here are talking about, and that is to cut Social Security benefits very significantly. And clearly that's where the Republicans are coming from, but it distresses me that I hear the President and members of Democrats in Congress also talking about that. And this senator will do everything that he can to protect this enormously important program, which, by the way, just in passing, has not contributed one nickel to the deficit because it is funded by the payroll tax, has a $2.6 trillion surplus. So from a moral perspective, we cannot and must not cut Social Security. And then, Mr. President, there are other geniuses out there who are saying, well, you know, Medicare, health care costs are going up, and maybe it's time that we did something like make major cuts in Medicare, including raising the eligibility age from 65 to 67. What's the problem? What's 2 years? Well, clearly, those folks have not talked to anybody today who is struggling when they're 60 or 63 and are looking forward to Medicare at 65. What happens, Mr. President, if you are a modest income person and you are 66 years of age and you're dealing with a health care crisis? Maybe you get hospitalized. But the government has said, pundits have said, my Republican friends have said, we're going to raise the Medicare age to 67. You tell me. Let the American people tell me what happens to those millions of people. What are they supposed to do? You get diagnosed with cancer. You have a serious heart problem. You're 66. You have no money in the bank. What happens to you? How many of those people will not survive? And then other people say, well, Medicaid's an easy program to cut. I mean, let's be politically honest about Medicaid. Medicaid is for lower-income people. They don't have lobbyists here. They don't make large campaign contributions. Many low-income people don't vote. They're an easy target to go after. Let's cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid. Well, let's be clear now, Mr. President. According to a recent study at Harvard University, some 45,000 Americans die each year, needlessly, unnecessarily, because they don't get to a doctor on time. 45,000 Americans, 15 times what we lost in the disaster of 9/11. Every single year, those people are dying. What happens if you make savage cuts in Medicaid? How many children do you throw off of the Children's Health Insurance Program? What happens to the older people who are now in nursing homes on Medicaid? What happens to all of those people? Well, I guess we don't have to worry about them. They're lobbyists. They're not here. What happens to people on disabilities? Now, we turn our backs on those people. That's what we do. Now, Mr. President, one of the very interesting aspects of this whole debate and why the American people are so angry, so frustrated, and so disillusioned is that Congress is moving in a direction of exactly the opposite way that the American people want us to handle deficit reduction. Every single poll that I have seen in my experience in talking to people in the state of Vermont has been that people want shared sacrifice. People understand that the wealthiest people in this country today are doing phenomenally well. Over a recent 25-year period, 80% of all new income went to the top 1%. The rich are getting richer, and you know what? Their effective tax rates today are one of the lowest in American history, about 18%. So the richest people in America who are doing phenomenally well are paying a lower tax rate than are nurses, teachers, and police officers. And the American people who see the middle class declining and the rich getting richer, they are saying, hey, it is only fair that the wealthiest people help us contribute to deficit reduction, that you can't place the whole burden on the backs of people who are getting poorer and poorer as a result of the recession. And the American people also understand that you have large multinational corporations like General Electric, ExxonMobil, and many others who have been making billions of dollars in profits in recent years and don't pay a nickel in federal taxes. And then on top of that, you have the absurdity of a tax policy which allows the wealthy and large corporations to stash huge amounts of money in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens, so that we are losing about $100 billion a year in revenue. And the American people are looking around and they say, that's crazy. The wealthy and large corporations who are doing phenomenally well, who are not paying their fair share of taxes, they have got to contribute to deficit reduction. It cannot simply be on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, the poor. That's what the American people are saying. Poll after poll. Mr. President, there was a poll that just came out the other day, just one more of many polls. Washington Post. Should the wealthiest people in this country be asked to pay more. That's the question. And they asked, in order to reduce the national debt, would you support or oppose the following question: raising taxes on Americans with incomes of over $250,000 a year? 72% of the American people in that poll said yes, 27 said no. Overwhelmingly, every poll that we see says the wealthy have got to pay more in taxes, and then these same polls say protect Social Security, protect Medicare, protect Medicaid, protect education. And here's the irony. We are marching down a path which will do exactly opposite of what the American people want. Our Republican friends have been absolutely fanatically determined that no matter what happens, billionaires and large corporations will not pay a nickel more in taxes. That has been their religious belief, not a nickel more from the wealthiest people in this country. And I have to say, Mr. President, Democrats have not been particularly strong in opposition to that, nor has the President been strong. Retreat after retreat after retreat. So in recent months, we have heard more and more discussion from Democrats about cuts in Social Security, cuts in Medicare, cuts in Medicaid. And now there is apparently a willingness to come forward with a proposal that would include only cuts and no revenue at all. No revenue at all. So, Mr. President, I think the American people are angry. I think they are frustrated. I think they are disillusioned, because what they want to see happen is deficit reduction done through shared sacrifice, through the wealthy and large corporations playing their role, appears not to be happening. And when they have said loudly and clearly that we must protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, they are also seeing that that is not happening. So, Mr. President, I would just conclude that I think there is a path to a deficit reduction which is fair and responsible. It does ask the big money interests to understand they are Americans also. They have got to play a role in deficit reduction. It does say that at a time when we have tripled military spending since 1997, we have got to make significant cuts there as well. So, Mr. President, I would hope that our Republican friends would give up their fanatic opposition to asking billionaires and millionaires and large corporations from playing a role in deficit reduction. I would hope my Democratic friends would stand tall, and I would hope that at the end of the day we would have a deficit reduction program that the American people would feel good about. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.